Do you like Beat Saber? I'm sure you do, right? Oh, as for me, well, I haven't actually technically played the game. Now, I'd certainly like to, but...
€30? €30? Ik ben toch zeker Sinterklaas niet.
And this is on PlayStation VR, where I don't have access to modded songs and stuff, meaning I'd have to pay additional money for every song added. Now that's insanity. Maybe a couple years ago I would have gone for it, but now, I have Dreams. Oh, Dreams, the amazing game engine on PlayStation 4 and 5 that allows you to make anything, including VR games. Now, to get to the point, my plan is to make a game like Beat Saber, okay? But not just that. I want to build a complete logic foundation from which other players are able to create their own levels. You heard that right! Custom songs on PSVR. The future is now, folks, the future is now. Let's get the basics done first. First, I need to make a modular block emission system that allows me to emit blocks on the beat and in sync with melodies. Let's get to it. Creating a game always starts with an intimidating empty scene. I first create some quick level geometry to get away from that boring empty nothingness. Directly after that, I'm making a small piece of music. First just a beat, then a melody. This is what I use to test if my logic system is actually working. Talking about logic, emitting blocks on a beat might sound simple, but there's actually a lot of stuff that needs figuring out. This is the setup I'm going for. A duplicated, muted version of the music plays one bar ahead. This muted version basically scans for upcoming notes that need to coincide with beat blocks and sends a signal ahead to a spawner, so the blocks can actually be spawned before the audible music has reached the same point. Now I think I want to talk about technical debt before I dive in. Now technical debt is a term used in game development to basically describe hacky code solutions that work in the moment, but require a complete overhaul if you want to change things later. Completely railroading development in the process. In other words, Halo Infinite. Now this is very applicable to Dreams as well, as it turns out. I can make this entire thing work for one particular situation, but of course that's not ideal. I want creators to be able to make their own levels, which requires me to make the logic very modular. There are 3 variables I'm dealing with. 1. Time until the blocks reach you. This is essentially the difficulty because it defines how much time you have to react. 2. Distance from where other blocks are emitted. This value will probably stay the same during gameplay, but I want it to be dynamically calculated so I can experiment with distances and allow creators to change them without having to later sift through all the logic, again avoiding technical debt. Last variable is rhythm of the music. The more upbeat the music is, the shorter the audio lags behind the spawning of a beat block, because the muted timeline is a flat amount of beats ahead, not a flat amount of seconds. As you can see, changing each one of these variables on their own messes up the timing completely. So to make the system dynamic, I need to create logic that compensates changing these variables. I created a 3-layered calculation and spawn system. I can just see you're dying to know how this works. Well, you're in luck, I'll tell you in excruciating detail right now. I'll have a bunch of permanent, invisible cubes in the scene that will be the spawn points. When the muted timeline sees a node, it sends a signal to one of these cubes to spawn a beat block. But instead of one immediately spawning, I first spawn another spawn cube. This one takes the travel time of the beat block and subtracts it from the time it was spawned ahead of the note playing in the audible song. Can be a bit hard to wrap your head around, so I'll give you an example. Imagine the muted timeline is double as early with spawning a note, either because the music is slower, the distance is different, or the travel time is quicker. In this example, I just waited twice as long before activating the audible timeline. If I spawn the beat blocks the moment the muted timeline sends a signal, they will arrive way ahead of the audible music. So instead, I spawn that second spawn cube, subtract the expected travel time from the time the spawner is emitted to early, and now I know the spawn cube needs to wait, in this case, 2 seconds before releasing the beat block, making it arrive exactly when the audible note will play. See? Easy. That travel time of the beat blocks I made a global variable creators can change. Other variables I can dynamically calculate. Now when I increase the spawn distance, the speed of the blocks will increase to make sure they still arrive on time. When I increase the travel time, the speed of the cubes will naturally decrease to make sure they still arrive on time.
Prachtig.
Next is something really fun, actually creating and cutting the beat blocks. I'm pretty lazy when it comes to art, so I just took a pre-made cube and colored it blue. The sword is a katana found in the Dreamiverse, and again simply color and brightness changed. Yes, I didn't want to use a lightsaber to at least set my game in one way apart from Beat Saber, okay? For slicing, I made it so the game calculates the dominant direction your controller is moving, and if that direction aligns with the cube and the sword hits the cube at the same time, that will count as a good hit. No matter how you hit it though, the cube will slice in 2 down the middle. Dynamic slices are impossible in Dreams because the game doesn't allow warping and editing of 3D models during gameplay. So instead, I just either emit a vertically or horizontally sliced cube asset. If you've been on my channel for a while, you'll know that if there's something I care about, it's hit feedback. I made the sliced cube flash for a short moment when first spawning, and I added a loud hit effect. This will make it really satisfying when you slice cubes exactly in time with the music, almost like you're playing part of the percussion yourself. It's a very important aspect of this kind of game. See the difference for yourself. Now, you may have noticed, but I'm not actually playing in VR. Now, Dreams allows you to play and create in VR, but unfortunately when I capture gameplay, the output is 720p. Now, this is bad enough already, but what would really make me anxious to ask you to subscribe at the end of this video is if I subjected you to 10 minutes of time-lapse head movement. So for the moment, I just mainly play on flat screen. I'm sure when I eventually test in VR though, everything will just work perfectly first time. Okay, so everything feels awful. The room feels too large, the sword is super small, the beat blocks are way too big and move way too fast, my feet feel like they're beneath the floor. But luckily this is all visual, my logic was actually solid for once. Now, feeling more confident in the gameplay, I invested the time to create directional and different colored versions of all the beat blocks. This is starting to look like Beat Saber now, but we're not nearly there yet. Time for the next challenge. Creating the level creator. Here's how it will work. For every possible beat block, I'll create a variable with variable modifier, basically a remote button that will activate it. Having a good naming convention helps. I like the one I came up with. I define the color, then the object, then directionality, then the layer, and last the position in which it spawns. By activating these remote buttons, the corresponding cube will spawn. Since you do this for an entire song, it will of course become a complete mess of wires, but that's unavoidable. Still, there are ways to make it more efficient. First of all, you won't actually have to wire up each individual note since Dreams gives instruments a note output, giving you a signal for every note in that part of a song. Also, I had this idea to create sequences, basically logic blocks that emit beat blocks in a certain pattern. On every input, these will emit the next part of the sequence. I can, for example, easily make a wave going back and forth without having to wire up every individual hit of a kick drum to a specific emission cube. Since most parts in songs repeat anyway, making use of these sequences will cut down on a lot of time and effort. Now, when you take into account 5 block orientations for 2 colors at a possible 8 spawn locations, I would have had to name and create and wire up 80 spawners. Yes, 80. Maybe a bit overkill, so I opted for now to not have the ability to spawn red cubes on the right side and blue ones on the left. This cut the work down to 40 spawners, still a lot. To really turn this into a game, you also need a way to reset, start and quit. So I made a start menu, basically 2 beat blocks that are repurposed to either start or make you leave the game. At any point you can reset the level by holding both move buttons. More important than any menu though is the actual scoring system. I don't know how the scoring works in actual Beat Saber, but I made it pretty simple. Hitting a block correctly gives you 5 points and multipliers activate the more you hit in a row. Hit 4 blocks in a row and you get 2 times multiplier. Hit 8 blocks and you get 4 times multiplier. With 16 blocks you get 8 times and with 32 you get 16. I like allowing players to earn relatively high scores. It will create more interesting separation between skill levels in the leaderboards. The only disadvantage of this system's simplicity is that there's a pretty obvious perfect score you can reach. You cannot do better than simply hitting all the blocks correctly, since I don't take timing into account. But hey, do you notice something? I don't have anything left to create really, so this is the perfect time to start actually creating a level. This is something I try to do with any template I make. Only when you actually start using it you will find the true bugs and the true problems. I'm taking some music I made in the past along with its scene and turning it into its own Beat Saber level. After already spending so much time on this, surely there won't be many bugs, right? There were many bugs, painful ones too. The first one I already kind of anticipated, but I just tried to ignore it and hoped it would fix itself, which it of course never does. What happens when you hit 2 blocks within the same frame? Well, both will send a signal to increase the score by 5 at exactly the same time, making it seem like one signal. I hope this bug would be rare, instead it was really common. You can't have inconsistent scoring in a competitive high score game, that's just a bad look. To fix this issue, I performed some black magic trickery where I spawned a cube in the scene that waits with adding points until other of these spawned cubes are gone. This fix actually makes the game slightly more satisfying as well, as hitting 2 blocks simultaneously now has this forced 0.1 second delay where the points start adding up. Next bugs were just a bunch of random stuff. I forgot to name some things, wired up some stuff in the wrong way, the usual. But then I suddenly found myself on a pretty important crossroad. The game was working 90% consistent, but something was off, and I already knew exactly what. Earlier in this video I said that I decided to make the blocks separate by checking if the required slicing direction was the same as the dominant direction your hand is traveling in. This seems like a decent idea and works well until you really start to make a difficult level. Here's the issue. Imagine I need to slice a block downwards and my arm is next to it. I need to move my arm to the right to get to the block and down at the same time to slice it. If your speed to the right happens to be greater than down, the frame you touch the cube, this counts as a fail. Technically speaking, it is your fault, but in the difficult level it just feels like the game isn't listening to you. The reason why this left me at a crossroads is because if there's one thing I didn't want to touch again, it was the 10 beat blocks with very messy logic. I wanted so bad to leave this in there, but of course I couldn't, so I went back in. A long time of messy, mind-killing logic later, and diagonal cuts now count as hits as well. And man, I couldn't have predicted the impact this made. Where some block sequences felt impossible before, I could now reliably get through them. I cannot overstate how much more fair the game feels with this logic. Still, I made this entire thing optional, because well, why not? More modularity is always better. The rest of development is all small things. I worked on a menu system for my game so I can have multiple songs, and I made a second level, based on a song of the Corrupt Momentum soundtrack, a shooter I made a long while back. This is an easy level for players to get used to the game. The other one, by the way, is very difficult to really test your skills. During the entire creation process I also fleshed out controller mode. Basically allows you to play the game on a flat screen with a DualSense. It's not a good experience at all, but it does allow for more people to check the game out. And as you've seen, it's nice to be able to use a controller to test your level if you're not actually creating in VR. So another while later, and I released my game, together with a template, all neatly packaged up, with some notes here and there to help creator understand how to use it. Creating a complete level is pretty easy from an accessibility standpoint, but very time intensive. This is almost unavoidable though, when you think about a song, in the amount of beats, the amount of times an instrument plays a note. Having all of those correspond with specific spawn blocks is always going to take time. Unless you randomize the whole thing, which is actually possible. This is Dreams after all. That's pretty much it. I actually succeeded at creating an admittedly inferior version of Beat Saber, but still, the level creator is here and it's awesome. If you own Dreams and PSVR, of course feel free to check the game out. I've left a link in the description below. For the rest of ya, thank you for willingly choosing to subscribe. I'll see you guys around. Bye bye.